Ja, herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einem weiteren Interview. Heute mit dem Experten Caldwell B. Esselstyn. Er ist ein amerikanischer Arzt, Chirurg, olympischer Goldmedaillengewinner im Rudern. Er ist Autor von Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Im Deutschen heißt dieses Buch Essen gegen den Herzinfarkt, in dem er für eine fettarme, vollwertige Ernährung auf pflanzlicher Basis plädiert und alle tierischen Produkte und Öle vermeidet. Eine Diät, die der ehemalige US-Präsident Bill Clinton als Patient von ihm befürwortet hat. Er ist einer der Ärzte des bekannten Dokumentarfilms Gabel statt Skalpell, welcher 2011 das erste Mal zu sehen war. Er erhielt mehrere Auszeichnungen in der Medizin und in etlichen Zeitschriften. Einer seiner seltenen Interviews, gell, hast du recherchiert? Ne?
Gibt nicht viele. Ja.
Gibt nicht viele. Und für uns hast du die Ehre gehabt, ihn zu interviewen. Und darauf freuen wir uns. Und wir wünschen auf jeden Fall viel Spaß bei dem Interview. Und ja.
Ist ein toller Mann.
Ist ein toller Mann. Genau.
We're very happy and honored to have you here with us, Dr. Esselstyn. You're an American physician, surgeon, and Olympic gold medalist in rowing. Well, you also have Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease from 2007, in which you argue that a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet that avoids all animal products and oils. A diet which has been advocated by former US President Bill Clinton as a patient of yours. You are one of the doctors featured in the internationally known 2011 documentary Forks Over Knives. In 2005, you received the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine, and in 2009, the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Cleveland Clinic Alumni Association, and in 2016, you received the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Esselstyn, we're so thrilled to have the possibility to bring you to a German-speaking audience, as we believe your scientific work will be the foundation for not just cardiovascular health, but help to start a revolution for how we will approach health and disease in the near future. Thank you very much for joining us today. Yeah.
Well, what an honor for me. I really am looking forward to this. I'm quite excited, and let's see what happens.
Very good. So I'll start with the first question. Your well-documented scientific work has marked a revolution for how we should approach cardiovascular disease. The standard approach uses repeated open heart surgery, angioplasties, stents, and a host of medications. Yet the causes of the underlying processes remain unconsidered, and the disease progresses, including all its consequences. There are cultures in which high blood pressure, heart attacks, and strokes are virtually unknown. What could we learn from them?
Well, I think that's an excellent question to sort of start with. The fact that we are faced with the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization, which is cardiovascular disease. And when you look at it, that's an illness that practically is non-existent in half the planet Earth. And we've known that really for a number of years. And yet we persist in perhaps looking the other way when it comes to the causation of the illness. And what to me is so striking is that there seems to be agreement among experts that where this disease has its inception, its onset, its beginning, is when we progressively injure the life jacket and the guardian of our blood vessels, which happens to be that delicate innermost lining of the artery, the endothelium. And what makes the endothelium so truly remarkable is the magic molecule of gas, nitric oxide, which the endothelium produces. And it is nitric oxide which is the salvation and the protection of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable functions.
I mean, what many people don't know, I just read a little bit in your book in the last few days, is that these changes in the endothelium are starting at a very early age. You know, just the quotation of the American soldiers that were killed in Korea many people are not aware of this. They think it starts when you're 40, 50 and you start to get out of breath and things like that. But actually, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Yeah.
That's an excellent point. We know that when, sadly, even when children at age 12 sadly succumb, at autopsy, they already have fatty streaking. And if you follow through on that, you mentioned, yes, in the Korean conflict, we know this, that when we autopsy our GIs who have died in combat, 80% of those GIs at an average age of 20 already have gross evidence of coronary artery disease that you can see without a microscope, but not enough yet for their cardiac events. So that study was then repeated again in 1999, looking this time at young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who had died of accidents, homicides, suicides. Now the disease is ubiquitous. Again, not enough for their cardiac event, but here you are with the foundation of coronary artery disease between 17 and 34, and it's no great surprise that if people continue to eat the same way, by the next 20 years, end of their 40s and 50s, they now begin to have these clinical cardiac events.
But by the way, I always wondered, did these results get any media attention at the time when the autopsies were carried out? Because I just saw some papers written on it, but I didn't see the media attention that caused. I would think it could have stirred up something, but I'm not sure.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, it's it's really such a peculiar reflection. Just imagine that right now, we have in this country a horrible epidemic of coronavirus, COVID-19. And what is happening is people are projecting every day we're going to have 40,000 deaths, we're going to have 50,000 deaths, we're now approaching 60,000 deaths within 2 or 3 months. Yet we have a disease here that is killing in the United States 800,000 in a year. And we recognize that as being unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's really a very poor reflection on really the degree of attention that cardiovascular disease is receiving, and physicians just accept this as the norm. Nothing is further from the truth, especially when you look at the nations that never have this disease.
Yeah, no, I was shocked that in the literature, I think it was in the Lancet, even in the 20s, there were already studies demonstrating that there are areas on this planet that high blood pressure and therefore all its consequences are virtually unknown. I couldn't believe it, that actually it had been scientifically proven for such a long time and not just anecdotes that people told us when traveling to these places. Yeah, I was stunned.
Yeah, and even in the 1950s, and actually even early in the 40s, Lester Morrison did some studies on the arrest and reversal of heart disease.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then people will say, well, you can always have grass-fattened beef. Well, let's look at that. In 1972, in the American Journal of Epidemiology, Dr. George Mann was a great believer in the fact that you could eat meat if it was grass-fed. And to his credit, he went to Africa and he studied the Maasai, who live on meat, blood, and milk. He did 50 autopsies on the Maasai. They were loaded with heart disease.
Mm-hmm. I spent 2 weeks with the Maasai, and I was already wondering at that time, yeah, about their diet.
They were wonderful. They were herdsmen, yeah.
Yeah. You had been a conventionally trained surgeon and were following the guidelines of your education. What made you as an individual change your path?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. By the late 1970s, when I was chairman of our breast cancer task force, I became increasingly disenchanted or disillusioned with the fact that for no matter how many women I was doing breast surgery, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And that led me to do a bit of the global research. And it was quite striking to find that there were other cultures like Kenya, for example, where breast cancer rates were 30 and 40 times less frequent than in the United States. And if you looked at rural Japan in the 1950s, breast cancer was very infrequently identified. And yet, as soon as the Japanese women would migrate to the United States, by the second and third generation, still Japanese American, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. And perhaps even more powerful was the rate of prostate cancer in Japan. In 1958, in the entire nation of Japan, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? 18 in the entire nation. One of the most mind-boggling public health figures I think I've ever encountered. And yet by 1978, 20 years later, they were up to 137 deaths, which still pales in comparison to the 28,000 who will die this year of prostate cancer in this country. So somewhere along the line in this global review, it began to be apparent to me that there would be more bang for the buck if I could look at cardiovascular disease, because there were many cultures that I was encountering where cardiovascular disease was virtually non-existent. And it seemed to me that the dream would be if we could get people to eat to save their heart, they would also give themselves the greatest opportunity to avoid the common Western cancers of breast, prostate, colon, and perhaps pancreatic. So then it became apparent that the only way I just couldn't go back and start preaching about this, because you really had to do some research. And so, although I was still active as a surgeon, I felt that this was something that I'd have to. It seemed to me that I could do a small study and get the Department of Cardiology to provide me with patients who were seriously ill with cardiovascular disease and see if I couldn't somehow get them to change their diet to being plant-based. So I started with 24 patients. I should mention to you that before I started the research, I felt it was important for me to know what I was going to be asking these patients to do. And since my father had had his first heart attack at 43, I guess you could say that I was a target. So in 1984, I can remember the day. I remember I was wanting to do this study, but I demanded, and somehow the months went by and I just wasn't doing this. I was just, what was a pivotal moment? And it was, I was at a meeting, a surgical meeting with my wife in New Haven, Connecticut, at the Eastern Surgical Society. And I can remember this was April of 1984, and the the papers at the meeting were really quite boring, quite dull. The weather was not very nice, but they always have a banquet after these surgical meetings. And at the banquet, this waitress put this plate in front of me, and the roast beef was so big it was draped over the sides of the plate. And I shook my head, and my wife said, "You're not going to eat that?" And I said, "Nope." And she said, "Well, then I'll have it." Oh, now it was interesting that Anne's mother had aged 53, had died of breast cancer. And 2 weeks after that meeting, her sister came down with breast cancer. And then she looked at me and said, "I'm with you." So it was April of 1984 that we started ourselves eating plant-based. And the next year, by then I had quite, I thought, adequate experience with this, and my own numbers had dropped precipitously from a cholesterol of about 190. I don't know how that fits with the European numbers, but
Same. Yeah.
dropped down from 190 to about 119, especially when I stopped all the oil. And so in July of 1985, I started this group of patients. Now, the rock upon which I felt this study was most likely to flounder would be lack of patient compliance, because it is a very significant lifestyle transition when you start eating whole food plant-based nutrition. So I decided to use for these patients the same mantra that I was using for my cancer patients. And the mantra was something that I had learned years ago from a wonderful West Coast surgeon by the name of Bert Dunphy. And Bert used to say that patients with cancer are not afraid to suffer. Patients with cancer are not afraid to die. But patients with cancer are afraid of being abandoned by their physician or by their family. So I saw every one of these 24 patients every 2 weeks in my office for the first 5 years, when we would check their blood pressure, their weight, their cholesterol, and I would go over every morsel they ate. At the end of 5 years, I got a little bit courageous, and I stretched it out to want to see them once a month. Most cardiologists will see their patients twice a year. And then at the end of a decade, they were now pretty well on autopilot, so I was able to stretch it out to quarterly. And then at 12 years was when I wrote up that first paper. And 12 years makes it, I think, one of the longest, if not the longest, follow-up. Granted, it's a small study of patients in this type of study. And these patients were sick. They had failed their first or second bypass. They had failed their first or second angioplasty. They were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused. 5 were told by their expert cardiologist they would not live out the year. Those 5 made it over to 20 years. And we began to see really some striking elements of disease reversal that were really rather exciting. Now, it was interesting, particularly to look at something like what happened to their HDL cholesterol. We noticed that immediately when they started this, their HDL cholesterol began to fall. And the low limit of normal for men in this country is 40 milligrams per deciliter. These men, uniformly, they dropped into the mid-30s. But at the same time, we were noticing that their symptoms were disappearing. They were losing weight, and when we carefully studied them, they were beginning to reverse their disease, even with a lower than normal HDL cholesterol. As you know, a fair amount more has been learned since 1984 about the HDL. And we know it's a highly anti-inflammatory molecule. And it's interesting that when Bill Connor, a wonderful physician who is since deceased, went to northern Mexico and studied the Tarahumara Indians who thrive on the three sisters, beans, corn, and squash. Their normal HDL cholesterol is 25, which would drive the unknowing cardiologist absolutely apoplectic. And yet they never have heart disease. And as I say, they live on beans, corn, and squash. They have no nutritional deficits, and they are amazingly athletic and strong. So it's rather interesting. There was a study done on the HDL cholesterol by Dan Rader and his team from the University of Pennsylvania. This study was in the New England Journal of Medicine, the January 13th issue. And they looked at over 2,000 people where they drew blood and they measured their HDL cholesterol. Some were high, some were medium, and some were low. And then they did an amazing thing. They then measured the capacity of each of those HDL cholesterols to do its job of reverse cholesterol transport. What did they find? There was no relationship whatsoever between the measured blood level of HDL cholesterol and its capacity to do its job of reverse cholesterol. And it was the very next month in the journal that escapes me at the moment, Nature's Review of Cardiology, that the team from UCLA looked at the protein moiety of the HDL molecule, ApoA1. And what they found was that when persons eat the Western diet, they injure that protein moiety, that ApoA1 segment of the HDL molecule. And that converts the HDL molecule from being a strong, normal, anti-inflammatory molecule. Your HDL now becomes a pro-inflammatory molecule, joining with your LDL to injure you. Rather fascinating.
I mean, all the things you're just telling us now is that the science has been out for a while. The patho mechanism have been known for quite a while, and yet, how come whenever I give talks to cardiologists here in Europe, nobody seems to know about all of that? What can you tell us about that? Hardly anybody knows your publication, and even quoting these studies, nobody had ever heard of them. How come?
Well, I have no idea how, except yes, there have been some people in the United Kingdom, in Lithuania, in Singapore. I've been to China. I've been to Italy, but I've never been to Germany.
We'd love to have you over anyway.
until today, but I'd like to just make a few comments. We started to discuss this a moment ago, but I drifted away from it. And that is, I should share with you that once a month at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute, before this virus came in, I conduct an intensive counseling seminar for cardiovascular disease patients who may come anywhere throughout Canada, throughout the United States, or from overseas. I limit it to no more than 12 to 14 persons, always with their significant other or their spouse. because both parties, when it's this kind of lifestyle change, have to know what's involved.
Mhm.
Now, during this seminar, I only get to see these patients one time because they can't fly in from 1,000 miles away every 2 weeks. So I get them one time. And this is a 6-hour seminar.
Right. Mm.
And they're going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we are going to empower them as the locus of control to halt and to reverse their disease. And in addition, everybody receives a very hefty notebook with a copy of every one of the PowerPoint slides that I will use, several of our scientific articles, a 44-page handout with many additional recipes that add to the 240 recipes that will be in the 2 books that they will receive from us.
Great.
There is a marvelous hour-and-a-quarter presentation from a woman who's had 35 years experience acquiring and preparing plant-based foods, dealing with reading ingredients, travel, and in restaurants. And in addition, everybody at the seminar is going to receive a video or DVD of the entire 6-hour seminar. So if they should go home and get forgetful or rusty, they can flip this on and get themselves back up to speed. Then, in addition, we always have 2 or 3 local or regional participants who've had a previous successful experience who will share their story with those in attendance, who are then able to say to themselves, listen, if he or she can do this, I can do this. Then we have a delightful plant-based lunch, and I have an opportunity during that time to go to each of the tables and answer everybody's personal questions. And then we have this delightful plant-based luncheon, as I mentioned, and then after they leave, we then stay in touch either through email or through phone call.
That sounds great.
Well, the key here is people will say, how do you get people to make this transition? Other physicians who have attended will go back and they say, I can't get my patients to make this change. And I said, well, could I ask how you do this? Do you give them 12 or 15 minutes in the office visit without their spouse? Well, Dr. Esselstyn, you have to understand, I am a very busy physician and I said, it's not going to happen that way. You maybe have to take off Wednesday afternoon, or you give them Saturday morning. But I think the only way you're going to have a lifestyle change succeed is you must show a patient respect. The only way that I know to show a patient respect is to give them our time. And I should mention to you that 2 weeks before that seminar, my secretary will give me a list of the names of those who are coming with their telephone number. So 2 weeks before they come, I personally insist myself on calling every one of those patients so that I can have an opportunity to get my arms around their story, and at the same time provide them with an opportunity to ask questions of me, so that coming to the seminar, we already have a strong platform from which we can move forward.
That's great.
We wrote up 200 patients in that group in July of 2014 in the Journal of Family Practice. And we found that we had a 90% adherence rate.
I was about to ask that. Yeah, how high is the compliance? That's a beautiful number. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Well, what happens so quickly is patients who have, especially those who have mild angina, it's a chip shot with them, because literally it's so wonderful. Often within 4 to 6 or 8 days, suddenly that little hill that always gave them trouble when they were walking, and now I can walk up the hill. Or before they walked 2 blocks and they got chest pain, now they suddenly can find they can walk 3 or 3.5 blocks before they get. But they know they're on the right track. And the other, I think it's time that we talk a little bit now about what I share with them about the causation of the illness, because I think your audience might find that interesting. Let's go back to the fact that, am I going too fast?
No, fine. Go ahead.
Let's go back to the where we talked about where all experts agree that where this disease has its inception, its onset, its beginning, is when we progressively injure the life jacket and the guardian of our blood vessel, which happens to be that delicate innermost lining, the endothelium, and specifically that remarkable molecule of gas, nitric oxide, which is made by the endothelial cells, that is responsible for the really for the salvation and the protection of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable functions. All right, what are the remarkable functions that nitric oxide has that are so important? One, nitric oxide keeps all those cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. It keeps things from getting sticky. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, or inflamed, protect us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number four, this is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from ever developing blockages or plaque. So literally everybody on the planet Earth, whether they're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or Cleveland, Ohio, if they have cardiovascular disease, it is because by now in the previous decades, they have so significantly trashed, injured, compromised, and turn their endothelial system into a train wreck that they no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from making blockages and plaque. So the good news here, though, is this. This is not a malignancy. This is a completely benign foodborne illness. And once you can get patients to understand this and never, never, ever again pass through their lips anything that is going to further injure their endothelial cells, and then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide, so once again we can halt disease progression, and we often will see significant elements of disease reversal. Now, what are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure the endothelial cells? One, any drop of oil, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Do you ever eat oil?
Well, that's one of the first questions that always pops up and when we give our food advice, because we actually included your findings in our nutritional approach, but people are confronted all the times with all these diets, advising them to even take loads of them. Yeah, talking about ketogenic, talking about Atkins, talking about, all of those approaches, and people are so irritated of what to do. And then at least they're told the Mediterranean diet will do you some good. But Jan, what's your opinion about all these information pouring onto people and your conclusions.
I wrote a paper last year in the International Journal of Disease Prevention and Reversal. The title of the paper was, Is Oil Healthy? And I go through all the animal studies, the human studies showing how saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat all injure the endothelium in varying degrees. So hopefully there's some literature to back up what we say. There are some wonderful studies out there that show how endothelial cells are injured by the oil. Now, a lot of the papers that you mentioned, especially you're familiar with Predimed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think were the relationship with some of those authors to industry? I mean, immediately all the credibility is gone. Here was Predimed, a study of 5,000 people from Spain, all of whom, to qualify for the study, could not have any evidence of cardiovascular disease. So they went into then these three different groups. Mediterranean diet with olive oil, Mediterranean diet with nuts, low-fat diet, 37% fat. At the end of the study, there were scores of patients in every single group who had had a major cardiac event of either heart attack, stroke, or death. So the title of the study was the prevention of heart disease with the Mediterranean diet. And when a reporter from the New York Times came to me and said, Dr. Esselstyn, would you comment on this study? It doesn't appear to agree with what you say. So I said, well, I think since everybody in the study to qualify could not have cardiovascular disease, and there were scores of patients in each category that developed heart attack, stroke, and death, developed disease, I think you have to change the title of the study. It should be the creation of cardiovascular disease with the Mediterranean diet.
Mm.
Now, I want to finish this progression because I'll lose my train of thought.
Mm.
Although it's unlikely with such handsome gentlemen in front of me. We said, what are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure the endothelial cells? We talked about oil. Also, anything with a mother or a face, meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs, out. Also, anything that is dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, yogurt, out. Sugary drinks, Diet Colas, Pepsi and Coke, out. Sugary foods, cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey, out. For patients with heart disease, nuts, peanut butter, cashew sauce, and avocado, out. And coffee with caffeine, out. Decaf, okay. Tea with caffeine, probably okay. Coffee with the caffeine, not okay. So, what are you going to eat? You're going to eat all these marvelous whole grains for your pasta, bread, rolls, and bagels, cereals. 101 different types of legumes, lentils, and beans. All these marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables. And sweet potatoes, white potatoes, some fruit. And in my book, there's 140 recipes. In the one by my wife and my daughter, another 140 recipes by John McDougall, wonderful recipes by Neil Barnard, wonderful recipes. So that there are available all these wonderful recipes. And people say, where are you going to get your protein? There is protein in grain, there is protein in legumes and beans, there's protein in vegetables, there's protein in potatoes. You're never going to be protein deficient. the strongest man on the planet Earth is a German, Babudian, plant-based, lifts 1,200 pounds. Where are you going to get your protein? Now, I should add something that we've included just in the last 9 years, and that is I asked the patients with heart disease to imagine shrinking their head to a size that it could crawl into the coronary artery, and they would see that the blockage or the plaque they have is an absolute cauldron of oxidative inflammation. So we need antioxidants. But no, do not go down to the health food store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant. Doesn't work, it's going to be harmful. I need those patients to get their antioxidants from food. Fair enough. What food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value. ORAC, oxygen, radical absorptive capacity. So if they're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries with their morning oats cereal, that's terrific. However, nothing can trump the antioxidant value of green leafy vegetables. So I asked these patients with heart disease to chew 6 times a day, not smoothies, not juicing. I want them to chew 6 times a day a green leafy vegetable that is approximately 3/4 the size of your fist after it has first been boiled in water or steamed for 5.5 to 6 minutes till it's nice and tender. Then you must anoint it with several drops of a delightful balsamic or rice vinegar. Why? Because the acetic acid in the vinegar has been shown to restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So they're going to chew this alongside their breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with their lunch and sandwich, that's 3, mid-afternoon, 4, dinner time, 5, and of course, I adore it when they have that evening snack of kale. What are they doing? All day long, they are bathing and basking that horrible oxidative cauldron of inflammation with nature's most powerful antioxidant. And the second thing that chewing the greens does, chewing the greens restores the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make the endothelial progenitor cells. What do? The endothelial progenitor cells replace our senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cells. The third thing that chewing the greens does, and this is so important, when you are chewing your greens, you are chewing a nitrate. As you chew this nitrate, it is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that normally reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria, as they mix with those green nitrates that you're chewing, reduce the nitrates in your mouth to nitrites. Now, when you swallow the nitrites, your own gastric acid reduces the nitrites to more nitric oxide. So now literally what's happening is, with no added expense, with no hideous side effect, you are restoring all day long nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which gave you this disease in the first place.
I mean, that could have been a question of ours now, because listening that nitric oxide is such an important, nitric oxide is such an important aspect for the cardiovascular health. Everybody else will go to the health food store or to the pharmacy and ask for nitrous oxide. or there had been a fashion in which you then bought arginine, the amino acid, in order to boost it. But I think the most important thing you just said is that we give all the sources of the authors that you included. We give them all the suggestions for movies, the Game Changer movie that came out last year, in order to motivate people to see that nature has supplied us with everything we need in order to get healthy. And I think that's beautiful to hear that from your voice. Yeah, we don't need to get out, buy supplements, drugs, and anything. If you combine it in a correct way, the body has its own intelligence in order to restore health. And that's beautiful, really beautiful.
You can actually purchase these test strips for nitric oxide. They come in a small vial.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take out the test strip and you put several drops of your saliva on the tip of the stress strip, it then begins to color pink.
Mm-hmm.
And there are gradations of the color. If the pink is very pale, your level is low. If it's a little higher, you're medium. And then if it's glowing pink, you're optimal.
Hmm.
And it's a nice way of, you can almost calibrate the amount of greens you're eating is reflected by how pink the test strip will be.
We ask patients all the time.
It's a way of letting the patients know whether they're achieving the goals that you'd like.
That's
and,
great.
But you can, I think, how do you purchase those? I think we purchased ours over the internet under the title Human, HUMAN.
All right.
Human N.
Okay.
And that might work.
I'll have to look into that. We use just pH strips for urine, and we can already see the change when people start changing to a plant-based diet. But that's an excellent idea to use these stripes for the mouth. Coming back to you yourself, you've been teaching now people for decades in terms of diet. Who actually taught you? How many hours did you have at medical school or in your further training in the science of food and what you can do to the body?
Thank you. I was a committed surgeon, but as I mentioned earlier, it was my disenchantment with the results that I was doing nothing for the next unsuspecting victim with breast cancer. That's what got me started with this. And then I never got any training in medical school on nutrition. If it was maybe 30 minutes or an hour. And certainly nothing in my postgraduate training. 4 years ago, I was invited by the American College of Cardiology to become a member. Why do they want retired general surgeons in the American College of Cardiology? I was asked to join their nutrition committee, and our goal there, it's a tough one. We are trying to educate cardiologists about the causation of the illness that they have been designated to treat. Cardiologists never get nutrition in their medical school, and they never get nutrition training in their postgraduate years. So here they are, left to use things like bypasses and stents and drugs, all of which have nothing whatsoever to do with the causation of the illness. And really, when you think about it, ever since the days of Hippocrates, there's been a basic covenant of trust between the caregiver and the patient, that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of their illness. And sadly, today in cardiovascular medicine, that's not being done. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually like to study the history of medicine, and that actually goes as far back as the Epicurean time, in which the Epicureans looked for a patient in the picture of his diet, his lifestyle, his dwelling, the weather, the temperature, and everything else. And then there was another group that sadly won that said, it doesn't matter what the origin of a disease is, just treat the symptom. And I thought it was just a few decades old, but actually it goes way back in history. Yeah. So where were we? We were, let's continue with some more questions here. You have also been very active for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, an organization which speaks out for animal rights and supports a whole food plant-based nutrition. And nutrition, like it has many levels, not just for us as an individual. What do you like to tell us, our viewers and listeners today, about all the other layers of just, we've been talking about cardiovascular health, but what else can we influence by going back to a plant-based diet?
Yeah. Well, cardiovascular disease was primarily my focus. But what happens to the patient with cardiovascular disease who has diabetes? Their diabetes begins to improve and goes away. Often these patients are overweight. Their obesity goes away. Their hypertension goes away. It's really quite profound how plant-based nutrition really accounts for the causation of 80% of our common chronic killing diseases. In addition to those I've just mentioned, you have to think about vascular dementia, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, allergies and asthma, and the list goes on and on. And it is just so profound. It is as if the heavens have opened and given to medicine the most profound tool that we've ever had in our toolbox. Now, as far as the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, I have always had a great respect for what Neil Barnard is trying to do. But when I have been pressed to go out and speak from animal rights groups, I have deferred and have been reluctant to actually speak on that behalf, because if I begin to speak strictly about animal rights, then people will say I will have lost all my credibility. The only reason you're doing this is for animals. But when you think about it, if I can get people to eat, if I can get the two-legged people to eat to save their lives, automatically that means that I'm going to be saving the four-legged creatures as well when they start eating correctly.
Yeah, no, I think you use beautiful terms to describe what we have been given with nutrition. Yeah, thanks for these words. They were truly beautiful now. We've been talking again about all this knowledge being out there, yeah, but still the current system is very reluctant to take on any of these perspectives, yeah? And in view of many critical physicians, our healthcare, so-called healthcare system, is more a disease management system. I mean, I read in one of your articles how you contacted a former colleague of yours, and you were asking him about the conflict between all this knowledge of plant-based nutrition and nutrition being the medicine, and on the other hand, his income that he had yearly in order to make all these things that don't change nothing about the etiology of the disease, but obviously are very lucrative. I mean, that's basically the answer, I guess, but nevertheless, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think are the main obstacles that the system is not changing with all this data that we have? Yeah?
Yeah, well, you think of what some of the forces are that are working against us. Well, you start with the government. The United States Department of Agriculture. Huh? Who are the officers in the United States Department of Agriculture? They were formerly the president of the Cattlemen's Association. They were president of the Dairy Board. They were president of the Pork Board, the Chicken Board. I mean, all these people have total enormous conflicts. When the United States Department of Agriculture every 5 years makes the plate for the American public, it has on it all the very foods that will, if Americans eat those foods, it really guarantees that millions will perish. That's the government. What about business? Well, what about the pharmaceutical business? How much is the statin drug? $35 billion a year. Do they want to see that go away? And then there's, what about my own colleagues? Those who are involved with stents and bypass, are they clamoring for fewer and fewer patients? So there are literally, enormous conflicts, but I think that what will prevail, because it's really the horizon is so different now than it was when I started with this 34 years ago. I mean, I used to be a hard-nosed macho surgeon. When I began to get interested in research, behind my back, I was called Dr. Sprouts. I was very proud of, because that began to change when they began to see that we had striking evidence, and we've showed it time and again, striking evidence of disease reversal in the coronary arteries, the carotid arteries, the arteries to the leg. It's I don't know if you may recall in my book, in the picture section, we have pictures of the PET rubidium dipyridamole scan of the heart. The PET scan of the heart, when we first show this patient, if it is orange or yellow, it's good perfusion. But then there's that patch of green where there was very poor perfusion. Then what we do is we counsel the patient after they had the scan. And in 3 weeks, when we repeat it again, it is all now orange and yellow. What? In 3 weeks? How did that happen in 3 weeks? What's going on in 3 weeks? In 3 weeks, we know that what is fascinating, because where I learned this was the first patient I had who had this, had two of his three major coronary arteries were 100% blocked. The other was 70% blocked. And his angina goes away. How does that happen? I have a beautiful slide that I use in presentations that shows the heart with no muscle. It's all blood vessels. And you can see, obviously, not only do you see the large three epicardial coronary arteries, the left anterior descending, the right coronary artery, and the circumflex, okay? Where do they all go? They all dive into the muscle, and then that's a beautiful film, and it shows all these tiny little vessels interdigitating from these three arteries, thousands and thousands of them. So I wondered why these patients were getting rid of their angina in 3 weeks. We know we didn't remove any blockage. What was happening? So when I saw that slide, I then called to our chairman of cardiovascular pathology, a gentleman who dissects 200 hearts a year from the deceased. And I said, Rodriguez, how often do you ever see ordinary cardiovascular plaque and blockages once the artery has dived into the muscle? His answer? Never.
Didn't know that. Yeah.
Once in a great while in a severe diabetic. Otherwise, when the artery has dived into the muscle, not there. Now I had the answer why they got rid of their disease. Obviously, those two arteries that were 100% blocked don't change. But what does happen is this. When we first see that patient and they're eating this terrible Western diet, their endothelial cells have been absolutely crushed. And at the same time, we now know that the endothelial cell is working against you. It has become your enemy. Why? Because now it is no longer making nitric oxide. It is making two molecules that are vasoconstrictive, endothelin and thromboxane. So when we first see those patients, and their endothelial cells are so beaten down, they're not making the vasodilator. They are making the two vasoconstrictors, thromboxane and endothelin. Then suddenly, they no longer are eating the Western diet. They're absolutely eating whole food, plant-based nutrition, chewing green leafy vegetables 6 times a day. What happens? They stop making the endothelin and thromboxane. They stop making the vasoconstrictor. They once again make a vasodilator. And the entire intramuscular area of heart vascularity, which does not have the classic blockages, but is blocked by physiologic constriction. Now that's gone. And you have opened now an enormous area of vascularity. And if we reflect back on Poiseuille's law of flow through the hollow viscous is related to the 4th power of the radius. Translation, a tiny increase in diameter through those thousands of intramuscular vessels is a huge increase in blood flow. I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not, but
Well, it certainly does. And I hope this beautiful picture will inspire many, many of our listeners, whether it's healthcare professionals, whether it's cardiologists, whether it's just patients listening to your voice. Thanks for being still so passionate about your subject, because that comes across. so that's really great. If I had unlimited power now, and I gave you the entire authority on our education system, and you were to choose the subject of health, where would you put it? When would you start with teaching about the power of nutrition? What part would it have in kindergarten, in school, in medical school, in life, in our media? I give you unlimited power now. Tell me what you would do. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'd eliminate the coronavirus so that I could come to Germany.
Yeah, let's start with that.
Travel to Berlin and Cologne and Halle and Frankfurt, and well, I think it all
We'll arrange that. Yeah.
It all comes down to education, and where do you start? If you were to start with children, I'm sure that people could be very creative with the drawings of how we start showing. I mean, and kids would learn this in a hurry, because what they would be able to go home from school and say, "Mommy, I've just learned today how Grandpa died." If you show an artery that slowly fills up with plaque, and then it shows how the plaque ruptures, then the clot forms. I mean, even a kid could learn how that would develop. If you should, I mean, the visual impact can be so powerful for children. Now, as far as adults, they could either see the movie Forks Over Knives, they could see The Game Changers, they could go to my website, they could go to perhaps hear some of the presentations that I made on YouTube. There's always my book and the book of others that clearly define, both in pictures and in words, how this develops. But I can just say that I mentioned to you about the seminar that I conduct once a month. And almost every month we have a physician or two who simply comes free. I think they pay for lunch, but they because they've gotten familiar with it, or they're aware of this. They want to make this available to their patients. And I've actually made a DVD of the entire seminar that is on my website for people who are interested. But the whole thing comes down to there are an increasing number of younger physicians who have gotten this, and unless they get tempted by the money they make through doing stents and bypasses.
Well, I think we're coming close to the end now. I think we could talk for ages with you. It was truly wonderful. And dear Dr. Esselstyn, we've been so happy to hear a voice, as you, for us, are an ambassador of truth and a lighthouse in a very special time of human history. Thank you for your time, and our best wishes for your plans to you and your wife.
Well, I think
for your future.
The reason I feel so passionate about this is that we are truly at the cusp of what could be a seismic revolution in health and in this country and overseas. And that seismic revolution is never going to come about with a pill, a drug, a stent, or bypass surgery. The seismic revolution will come about when we will be able to show the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them to absolutely annihilate chronic illness. And I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. All the best to you.
All the best. Bye-bye.